All right, so it's 5:35. I'll call the Community Development Authority meeting to order. First on the agenda is roll call. Abby, could you do that, or do you want to just make a note that you have it?
We have Nelson, Lori, Crow, Oaks, Wakely, and Weber present. Beddingfield is absent. Mayor Kuhn is going to be arriving late.
Great. Next will be the approval of the minutes from the CDA meeting on August 10th, 2023. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Great. Do we have any discussion? Any details that need to be changed? Updates, anything? All right, hearing none. All in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. First on the agenda item, we have zoning code rewrite project, request for feedback. Abby, do you take this over, or how we want to do it?
Yes, I will go ahead and pull up the draft zoning ordinance, and my apologies to anyone who tried to click the link in the packet, and I hope you were all able to access the link. All of the information related to zoning code can be found at cityofmiddleton.us/zoning. That's the easiest way to get to that website. And maybe before we go through the ordinance items that have been referred to us, instead I'll just quickly share the page. Can you all see the zoning ordinance webpage here? Okay. So this is a big project for our department. Mark Opitz, our city planner, is the lead staff, and he has put in so much work and effort to this project over the last year plus. It's honestly kind of hard to quantify the effort that this has taken, and this document is, over 200 pages, and frustratingly, we still are managing to find typos despite the amount of hours that have gone into it. So when you were reviewing it, if you noticed any misspellings, typos, or simple things like that, cross references that are inaccurate, shoot us an email on those items that aren't more policy issues, and we will make sure to get them corrected. We have scheduled 5 open houses, which we're promoting beginning tomorrow. We're going to be postering around town. We will be sending information out on our listservs. We are also going to put a notice in the utility billing that goes out on October 1st to advertise the last 2 open houses that we're holding. So we're going to be targeting members of the community who are involved with development, who own properties, and we just have a variety of methods where we're trying to make sure that everyone's aware of the project. The reason we need to rewrite the zoning code is that our zoning code is really outdated. It's actually older than I am. It was adopted in the 1980s. I know last night, if you attended the Economic Development Forum, Melissa Hunt mentioned that many communities have zoning ordinances that are really outdated from the 90s. So I was kind of cringing a little bit. Ours is actually even behind that. So one of the things so in addition to the city's comprehensive plan, which is the broad policy document that guides land use and other decisions that the city makes, that's the 20-year vision for the future. Our department is responsible for administering the zoning ordinance, and the zoning ordinance is one of the primary tools that we have available to implement the comprehensive plan. State law requires that 4 documents within city government are consistent with the comprehensive plan. Those documents are the zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, the official map, and one more that's escaping me because I'm very tired right now. I'm sorry.
No, it's not the strategic plan.
It's not the strategic plan, no. Subdivision ordinance. Well, at any rate, the zoning ordinance is required to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So what that means is if we adopt a comprehensive plan that says we're gonna encourage smaller lot sizes for single family residential as small as 4,000 square feet, let's say, then we have to have an ordinance that offers that as a category to implement the comprehensive plan. If we say, as we do in the comprehensive plan, that we are going to allow residential composting in every zoning district in the city as a permitted use, then we have to allow that in the zoning ordinance. So as we've gotten further along in the zoning ordinance, we've noticed and thought further about things that we actually need to change in the comprehensive plan in order to ensure consistency between the documents. So our department is also in the process of doing some minor updates to our comprehensive plan, and there's a public hearing for that on September 26th. So the zoning ordinance is not to be confused with the comprehensive plan, which is the broad policy document. It's the 20-year vision for the future. The zoning ordinance is a specific set of regulations that's intended to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community and provides information for every private property in the city and what is allowed on those properties. The zoning ordinance does not in any way pertain to public properties. So, well, rights of way, I should say. So one of the questions that came up recently in the Public Works review of the zoning ordinance was around like sidewalks. Well, those generally are in the right of way and those are not covered by the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance covers parcels of land that are typically privately owned, although it also includes conservancies and parklands and buildings, municipal buildings that the city owns. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what else I should provide as background before we dig into the specific sections. I think that's maybe a good start. And we might think of some other things to discuss as we go into the actual ordinance. So I will pull it up here. Okay, can everyone see the full draft? Okay, so we're going to start by going to section 10.0284, which is the section that describes the downtown design overlay. So 10.0284. This is also going to refer us to another section, but I want you to see the initial language. So part of the CDA's purview is over the downtown. This language here is talking about a special design overlay district that covers the downtown. And the intent of it is to preserve and enhance the historical quality of the downtown by attaining a consistent, visually pleasing image for the downtown area as defined in the map boundaries of the overlay district, which is really covering the traditional area that we think of as downtown. It does not go north of University Avenue. The regulations of this section shall apply to new development and to changes to any exterior of any building within the mapped boundaries. All design requirements for renovation, design alteration, and project review within the downtown overlay district can be found in section 10.0750, which is special areas. So this is basically when the Plan Commission is doing design review. They would consult with this section of the ordinance for any projects that are happening in the downtown. That would involve renovation, alterations to those. There is a separate section of city code that covers local, state, and national landmarks. And this downtown overlay district is not taking place of that. It's in addition to that. So there still is the local landmarks commission that provides guidance and recommendations to the plan commission regarding any exterior or site modifications to locally designated landmarks. I think maybe the area that you would want to focus your considerations of are the design theme. So if you can all see this language, I'm not going to read it to you, but I would welcome any comments that you have.
Abby, excuse me, could I just ask a very general question regarding the map itself?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I saw in the Plan Commission agenda packet, there was a map that showed all of the different, that corresponded to all of the new categories that are in this document. And I have to admit that, like, I couldn't tell like light peach from dark peach from apricot, or like the medium shade of gray from the dark shade of gray in
Okay.
looking at that document. And I also wasn't sure where the overlay started and stopped for this, which made me think a little bit about things like the senior center. If that were going to be redone, that might have to look different or whatever.
Right. Okay. Can you all see the map now on the screen?
Yep.
So I think that the map that was in the packet was possibly a PDF version that was highlighting particular areas. There were like, I think 27 areas that we wanted to highlight and call out for the plan commission. The best map to use is the one that is linked on the website. And if you click on draft
Oh, great.
zone
Okay.
map,
Okay, thank you.
our amazing associate planner Daphne Shu and planning intern Rashika Chumila, they are GIS wizards, and what they have done is they've laid out the zoning map in a way that it is, you can actually click on each parcel and it will give you the current zoning. So right now this is zoned B4, which is the downtown business district. The proposed zoning, which is MUD, mixed use downtown. And it also provides the future land use category from the comprehensive plan. So you can see in the future land use category, it says downtown mixed use. There's a definition for that in the city's comprehensive plan separately. And what we've tried to do is take all of the comprehensive plan future land use designations, and we have a conversion chart. So each one of those has a couple of options for corresponding zoning districts that might be appropriate. So in this case, I think all of the ones that are labeled downtown mixed use, they're all MUD, because that just makes sense. There's really only one category for that flu map designation. And for the downtown overlay, that is what is outlined here in black. So it does not cover the Cayuga Court development. So that might be something that should be, that you may want to consider adding. It really only covers a portion of the Middleton Center development, and then the entire block that the Stonehorse Green is on, the properties along Parmenter on either side, and then pretty much west of municipal buildings on Hubbard Avenue, and then the Muster Museum building and the historic train depot.
Abby, does it exclude the diner?
Yes, it excludes the diner. The diner would be, I don't like how I guess it's this one right here.
Yeah.
This is the diner.
Why would that be?
I think that it was really trying to focus on the more historic core, but also including the properties that are fronting on Parmenter Street.
I see.
It certainly could be changed. I mean, it's not, none of this is set in stone in any way.
Does anybody have any revelations.
I mean, I read through the design requirements for this, for the downtown district overlay, and I thought they were consistent with what I've seen coming through Plan Commission for like PDD things that are coming through for the most part. I guess where the district stops and starts, I don't know if that's within our, you know, like you were saying, Katie, if that's something we would talk about or not. There were going to be arbitrary decisions made and pluses and minuses to being in or out of it. But I didn't see any particular surprises, especially because like you guys can always exercise regulatory flexibility on the council and with Plan Commission and with the city, right? If you need to.
Right, and the Plan Commission will do design review for every new commercial building. One thing that will change, I think, pretty dramatically with the modern zoning code is right now, in order to build any kind of building that you have seen built in the last, let's say 15 years, including subdivisions like Middleton Hills, Misty Valley, Hidden Oaks, Bell Farm, which is coming, and Red Tail Ridge, which is coming. In order to do those kinds of things, you cannot do that under our current code. And so all of those projects have required a rezoning to Planned Development District or PDD. And that's one of the major reasons why we're modernizing the code is we're administering 70 PDDs and all the modifications that have come along with those. So it's like kind of a nightmare from an administration standpoint, and eventually we're going to try to rezone some of the PDDs back into standard classifications, but that's not part of this project right now. One big change is right now when there's a project proposed, because it requires that rezoning application, it will go to the Plan Commission. There will be a public hearing there, then it goes to the Common Council, and because it's a zoning map amendment, it's an ordinance change. And so that requires 2 readings at the Common Council. But what will happen with the new ordinance is if people meet the standards of the ordinance in the district where they're proposing a project, it will only go to the Plan Commission for design review, and that is it. If they can meet the setbacks, the height, the lot coverage, they still have to have a stormwater management plan. They still have to get a traffic impact study. All those things, those requirements still exist, but if they can meet them, they do not have to go through a rezoning process. They're simply going for design review. But they will still go to the Plan Commission for design review, and the Plan Commission is the entity that has the most expertise in like architectural and landscape architecture as well. They have a required architect on the commission. Right now, we currently have 2 architects, so we have really good expertise on that commission.
That seems like a good streamlining technique. Anything else from anyone? Yeah, Abby, go.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you would like, we can go on to the table of land uses. And this is,
I'm sorry. Are there any things we should know or think about with regard to building height in particular?
that is probably best, well, let's see.
I mean, if the answer is no, that's cool.
I guess just overall, the ordinance as it's proposed and the zoning map as it's proposed will enable taller buildings than under the current ordinance. It is not, we're not proposing anything that's inconsistent with all of the PDDs that the city has been approving. One of the goals of the comprehensive plan is that we're providing opportunities for infill housing, especially on major transportation corridors that are well served by transit.
Abby,
Yes.
can I clarify? Can you answer her question for just the downtown
Okay,
Yeah.
just the
Yeah,
downtown.
yeah, that's what I
district?
meant. Sorry. Thank
okay,
you, Mayor.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I think there's two different answers, and I'm okay with both. But I think for Kari's, it's not
Yep.
2 stories, but there was something that was in there.
Right, okay, yep, let me pull it up because I do not have that memorized. But I will say that right now in the downtown, under the current zoning, which is B4, it's our only zoning that permits a 0 lot line, and we allow 5 stories by right. So under the current zoning ordinance, the downtown district has the tallest buildings allowed by right, and that's 5 stories. So under the new proposed ordinance, we have, let's see here, a maximum principal building height of 60 feet or 5 stories. So that's an area where we're really not proposing a change. We would require a setback from street facing facades. So that's where, you know, you have the height, but you require the top floor. So if you go above 4 stories, the top floor would need to be set back 15 feet, and then they generally would put like a patio or something on that section of the building, kind of similar to what we have at Middleton Center across from Stonehorse Green, where you have that patio, except for that one's on a 2nd story. Let's see here. Yeah, so front setback, minimum 0 feet. Again, like we really want to encourage the 0 lot line setbacks in the downtown because it really creates a nice pedestrian experience. Trying to think if there's anything else in this district we should talk about. I guess I hadn't really thought of it this way, Kari, but I think that this might be the area where it's changed the least amount. And I think that there was a lot of concern over allowing much taller in the downtown because we do not want a new building to kind of overtake the historic buildings. We have, you know, we have some nationally designated buildings in our downtown, and there's a lot of regulation around what you can do when you're next to one of those buildings. So I think that this one probably will change the least.
Thank you.
Yep. And actually, well, okay, we'll go to the table of uses next. We'll stick with Mark's, we will stick with his format here, but we will talk about height again in just a minute. Not in downtown, but in all the districts, or all the other districts. So, the table of land uses, this is something that we will use all the time in our department. I'm not sure how often residents will take a look at this, but this is the document that shows, for example, in a mixed use avenue zoning classification, and this is mixed use avenue is something that you would commonly find on a commercial corridor like University Avenue. We are proposing that townhomes, multiplexes, apartments, and individual family living, as well as mixed-use buildings, live-work buildings, offices, professional services, and indoor sales and services, commercial kitchens, etc. That those are the uses that are shown as P, which is permitted by right. No additional approvals from the city are required. Food and beverage and restaurants and taverns are also permitted. C are uses that are conditional, and that means that we spell out particular standards within the zoning ordinance that must be met in order for them to get approval for a conditional use permit. There's still a public hearing process required. We still do a public notice and a yellow sign. And we let nearby property owners know when there's a use that's being proposed that's conditional. However, under recent regulatory changes at the state level, the city has very little flexibility in denying a conditional use permit unless you're unless you spell out very exacting standards in the ordinance and you can prove that the applicant is not meeting the standards, we really would, we would really be overreaching if we were to deny a conditional use permit for anything beyond what's regulated in the ordinance. One of the things that we've really tried to do through this ordinance is provide a lot more flexibility in the different types of commercial land uses that can go into a particular space. We do have buildings or zoning districts, in particular the mixed use districts, where we are going to, when it's on a corner property, we are going to require ground floor retail. That is something that I know Madison has struggled a lot with, because there's only a certain amount of retail that a community can support, especially given what has happened with, you know, online retail. The pandemic, I think, exacerbated a lot of the problems with retail. So we're not proposing that the entirety of the University Avenue be required to have ground floor retail, because we don't think that we would have the density of population to support that. But we are proposing that if it's a corner property, they're required to have a space. We have a plan commissioner, Commissioner Erdman Hermans, who has lamented many times about, you know, how do we create these pockets within neighborhoods that people can walk to? Because, you know, if you live close to downtown Middleton, you have access to walk to a lot of services. But if you're up in community of Bishop's Bay, where can you go to, like, you know, without walking or without driving in your vehicle? Where can you walk to get a cup of coffee, grab a carton of eggs or whatever it is? And we think that this is a very conservative approach to being able to kind of get a little bit of commercial space within to serve existing neighborhoods without being too burdensome to say that it has to be a restaurant or it has to be this. We would let the market decide, like, whether it is a Pilates, I'll say Pilates because Katie's on here, a Pilates studio or a restaurant or a bar or whatever it may be. So that's something that we're really trying to encourage, is that mix of land uses, so that every neighborhood is a complete neighborhood and they can access services and hopefully be able to walk or bike to get there and not have to get in their vehicle. So I guess that's all I'll say about the land use table, but I'll just open it up if anybody has any comments on it. Okay, I'm going to move on to the residential height exception. So I mentioned that we are proposing to allow a greater height than is currently allowed under our current zoning ordinance, so that we can encourage infill housing and infill development on major roadways that are well served by transit. There are a number of reasons we're doing that. Right now, a lot of the commercial areas we're proposing MUA, which is the Avenue Mixed Use District, which allows 5 stories by right. So most of University Avenue, a little bit of Allen Boulevard, maybe some of Century Avenue is showing the MUA, Mixed Use Avenue. So that's a 5-story building by right. As an example, the council recently approved the Cariad apartments. Those are on University Avenue. That's 5-story building. So what we're proposing is basically being consistent with what has regularly been approved through the process that we have now. But I do want to point out that we are looking at a tool for height exceptions in order to be able to meet some of the other goals that the city has. There is very limited, we have limited leverage in requiring affordable housing, for example, and we know that we need more affordable housing in the city. We, under state law, cannot require that a developer build a building that exceeds the stormwater management requirements that we have in place. And we have the same standards essentially that the county has. but we can incentivize it. And we have used tax increment financing or TIF to incentivize workforce housing developments, and also high quality stormwater management, net zero energy buildings, etc. What we are proposing through this code is for primarily really because we want to level the playing field with properties that are not in a TIF district. And so we're proposing that there would be a density bonus that would be allowed. So it's 1 extra story if a building could enter into a land use restriction agreement to provide affordable housing. And number 2, if they could exceed the stormwater management standards of the city, and that would be reviewed by the city's Water Resources Commission. I know from talking with Kelly Hilliard, our sustainability coordinator, that the sustainability committee is also going to be proposing a couple of other ideas. One of them being net zero energy, and then I think the other is bird friendly design. So making sure that the glass has like the little dots so that you don't have the bird strikes and the bird deaths that are caused by buildings that have a lot of glass on them. All of these 4 things will result in additional upfront costs. And so that's why we're proposing, hey, we can give you an extra story. You could go up to 6 stories in MUA if you meet one of these items. So that's all I'll say about height exceptions, but open it up to anyone who has any comments or questions.
This is Emily. Do you foresee those kinds of buildings in that downtown area that we're talking about for the CDA, or possibly because T-Wall has his buildings already? Do you see some of these 5 to 6 stories, like
Yes.
more of them coming?
MUD is one of the districts that would allow the height bonus. So the downtown would potentially allow it. I will say at least these 2 would be very hard to meet. There are a lot of additional costs related to developing affordable housing. It's not as much on the cost side as it is on the revenue side, right? So if you're restricting the rent, you're not generating as much income, and there has to be a subsidy somehow that will make up the difference. So it's going to be pretty hard for someone to get that LURA unless they're already developing affordable housing and they know how to go after the really competitive tax credit programs or other things. The stormwater standards will be very hard to meet on certain properties because we have a high groundwater table. It is true in downtown that we have a very high groundwater table. So infiltrating stormwater on certain properties is going to be really hard. And I think in order to meet those standards, you're going to have to be able to infiltrate stormwater into the ground. Downtown's also likely to have, if they're going with a 0 setback, there's not going to be as much green space on the property. So it's going to be very, very difficult to exceed the standards in the downtown. Some of the other items that I mentioned, and we're kind of still exploring this, net zero energy, I know is a big lift, and it's really a key focus of the city. The bird friendly glass is the one to me that I'm not sure. I support it and I think we should be doing it, but I just want to be sure that they're giving enough in order to get that extra story, because if we have 4 options and one of them is a much lower bar than the others, then every developer will probably go with that one. So that's one thing that we want to understand a little bit better. Katie?
Thanks. So are you saying that they only have to meet one of them or all of them?
They would only have to meet 1.
Oh, I see. Yeah, then I agree with you. I wasn't sure if you were saying that the bird thing was going to be hard to do. Because I know that one of the things when I was on sustainability, they wanted to rewrite it so you couldn't have glass meeting glass at a corner.
Yeah.
That's like birds see through it and think they can fly through it. But I think this is although it's a high bar, I think it's a really great incentive for developers to think about workforce housing. And What a great carrot to dangle. I think it's great.
Yep, and for the
Kudos.
bird-friendly glass, I was just gonna mention that Madison does have an ordinance right now that requires the bird-friendly glass. And if you look at the new buildings that are built, in the Madison Yards area, my husband's office is over there. You can see that they all have the new bird-friendly glass, applied to the windows. You can actually see what it looks like if you wanna check it out. We have the first bird-friendly project that hasn't yet started construction, but it's the Rock Ridge development that's on Pleasant View Road will incorporate bird-friendly glass. The reason we actually have it, I think, in the draft that we're circulating right now, but we're gonna be removing it because we've gotten guidance from our attorneys and actually also the city of Madison that because they are in active litigation, they are gonna fight that right now and see if they can keep it as a requirement in their ordinance. And so I think it would be best for the city of Middleton to just wait and see what happens with the city of Madison's ordinance. If it is upheld, then we could just come back and modify ours and make it a requirement. But we just kind of want to wait and let Madison fight the battle first and see how it goes.
Do you need us to say anything about that and like request that it not be one of the requirements for now?
You could, if you felt compelled. I think that the sustainability committee has probably also, actually I can't remember if they've had their meeting yet or if it's on Monday. Oh, it's actually on Monday. So my understanding is that they've got a small group of people that are going to be bringing that forward as a recommendation.
Sounds good. They know their stuff.
Okay, so moving on, we will go to accessory land uses and structures. Here. So 10.0328. Oops. This is clickable, by the way, so it makes it a little easier to get through the lengthy document. So 10.0328, 7, 8, and 10. So
I think Kari has her hand up, by the way.
Thank
Sure.
you. Before you dive into this, I have another, I think I'm just like map impaired or something, but could you also, I read through this and then I was like, well, what exactly does the CDA have purview over? Thinking about like our legal charge and the city map and everything. If you could just, when you talk about this, maybe you're going to do it anyway, but review the parts of the city of Middleton that we should be thinking about when we look at this.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That is a good question, and I talked with Chris Weber about this last night too, which is that it has been a while since we kind of went over the statute for the CDA. But in broad terms, the CDA looks at downtown and workforce housing. That is what the state mandate is. It's interesting because as our CDA in Middleton has evolved, we have really gotten away from kind of the housing part of it, but it used to be that we had a down payment assistance loan program for affordable housing. Another thing that CDAs will commonly do is they will oversee redevelopment districts. Redevelopment districts are tied to tax increment financing districts. In many communities, the CDA is the entity that reviews TIF applications. So our CDA is very different than the way that other communities operate. Brian Gatto, our city administrator, and I talked about it shortly after he came to the city. And he's like, this is unlike anything that I've seen in Mount Horeb, where he worked previously, and also in Monona. I think one of the oddities here, and maybe part of the reason why the CDA has not been involved with TIF, is that at one point in time, the CDA and the Plan Commission were combined as one committee. And they did review TIF applications, and when the split was made, the TIF applications went to the plan commission. However, in the last couple of years, we approved a TIF policy where those applications don't even go to the plan commission anymore. They only go to the finance committee and the council. One thing that might be helpful for us as we go forward would be, well, actually two things. One, I think it might be beneficial to invite a couple of other staff members from CDAs in other communities, just to like do like a little back and forth, like interview process, like what do you work on, and you know, where do you plug into the city process. But then another option would be something that the Public Arts Committee did, which is they adopted some short-term goals. So they have 3 to 5 year goals that they put forward and got approval from the Common Council for. So that might be something that we would want to look at. I know when I asked Mark to put this memo together for CDA, I said, give us what you're giving Workforce Housing Committee, because we already have the separate committee that covers that, and also anything that pertains to downtown. He included some other things that I know why he included them. It's because it's something that I think we've had committee members in the past that have been really passionate about, like bike parking standards, for example. So, you know, accessory dwelling units. So there are some things in here that are maybe a little off the CDA's typical topic, but we welcome feedback from any committees on any items. I mean, when the zoning ordinance went to the Public Works Committee, they commented on things that are a little outside of their purview as well. So we welcome any feedback. The items that Mark has highlighted here for your consideration, this is under the topic of accessory land uses and structures. So it looks like he wanted to show that accessory dwelling units are something that we are proposing would be allowed under the new ordinance. And this is something that is very much consistent with the comprehensive plan that the city approved. We've gotten a lot of requests from people who want to add a small dwelling unit that would either be attached or detached to their home, but would be on the same lot and under common ownership. And that's really what differentiates an ADU from like a 2-flat or duplex, is that in many cases, a 2-flat or duplex could be separated. They could be sold separately, but an accessory dwelling unit is a smaller unit that is accessory to the principal unit, and it cannot be sold individually. So there are some regulations around where the entrances are located, that it must adhere to the same building setbacks, that the principal or accessory dwelling unit owner must be the owner of the property. So not both units could not both be rented. Let's see, cannot be owned separately. The maximum size that we're proposing is 900 square feet. And I think that we were just following Madison's lead. That's what they allow. The appearance must be consistent with single family. We have some materials, and that there must be a parking space dedicated to it. So this would be allowed. I will say, there was a lot of buzz a few years ago when, it might have been 4 or 5 years ago now, when the city of Minneapolis approved a zoning ordinance that sort of overhauled single family zoning, allowed accessory dwelling units. And it was kind of groundbreaking at the time, and they got a lot of publicity for really being cutting edge with what they were doing. But still, even in Minneapolis, almost all of their new housing is on major commercial arterial roads that are well served by transit, which is a lot of where we're seeing infill. It's really hard to build one of these. It's very hard to get financing. So I think that it's a really good thing that we're allowing it and encouraging it, but I would in no way think that this is going to be the thing that solves the city's housing crunch. Katie?
Thanks. I'm just wondering, this would not allow like a tiny house on wheels, correct?
Correct. That is more of a building code issue, but those, they're not allowed according to our inspector under the building code. These would have to be, trying to think if we even address that in here, if I just know that from talking with our inspector. But it would have to be on a foundation, it would have to be permanently, it would have to be a permanent structure.
Good.
So I had a related question, which had to do with the materials. From my read of that, it would mean that a lot of the sort of like low barrier to entry, fairly high quality kit houses that are for sale, that you can put on a foundation, would not be available for use.
And is that because, because of the requirement to match
Yeah,
finish?
because of like roof slope and exterior finish material and all that. So if you want to get a snazzy $50,000 or $70,000 plug and play thing that meets all other building code and you put it on a foundation, then you can be like, nope, you don't have your hardy board.
I really appreciate you bringing that up because that is something that we struggled with too. I think that this language might have come from Vandewall's code, that their baseline code that they've kind of worked on other communities. And I think it really is, I mean, this is something that the CDA could definitely weigh in on. It's kind of like, do we care if it matches? Like, does everything have to match? Or do we want to allow a more eclectic vibe where maybe you live in a 1920s home, but you put something that's really modern in the yard?
I mean, I think about that block of Elmwood that's one of the most exciting and vibrant blocks with Hamid Nugani's house and the house across the street. And, you know, like, we don't all have to live in the 1880s to 1950s. So anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, I agree with Kari. I think I would put in my 2 cents on changing that little detail, letting it be more eclectic. I do happen to live in a 1920s home. And
Which is amazing. I mean, my house is 1904, but you know.
If I stuck something in the back, I would most definitely want it to be modern.
Yeah, yeah.
Like one of the container buildings.
Our zoning guru has just entered the room, Mark Opitz.
Guru.
Oh, Mr. Opitz.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, I understand what you're saying, Kari and Katie, and if the rest of the CDA is comfortable with recommending that change, to go ahead and rewrite the whole entire zoning ordinance, then Mark, what they're talking about is whether we really would be that concerned if an accessory dwelling unit, if the finished material matches the principal structure, because the concern would be that a lot of the kits that are available may not allow for that.
Well, if it's a certain size, I think the ordinance says 150 feet is the minimum. Let me just see here.
Here's the language.
Yeah, but there's another section of the ordinance that says if something's under 150 square feet, which of course is very small. So the general principle is any structure on your property that is under 150 square feet can be, that does not have to match the house. Once you hit 150 square feet, it has to match the design of the house or be compatible with the, like that language reads. Obviously an ADU is going to, I mean, very few people would have something unless it's a tiny home. Very few people would be in something under 150 square feet. So your feedback is to get rid of that. Is that what I'm hearing?
So Mark, I was the one who sort of raised this, and my thinking was that in terms of barrier to entry and affordable housing, which is sort of in our remit, and something that would cause the least amount of disruption, for example, in a traditional neighborhood, there are high quality kit homes of all different, you know, stages of plug and play, that where the builder, the company has worked to meet uniform building codes. And so you arrive with something that's already wired and plumbed and all that stuff, and you put it on a foundation as required. And it just seems to me that it's a missed opportunity not to have something that might be inclusive of an attractive, high quality, livable unit that could be done in a week that would meet so many goals that we have with this code.
Gotcha. I mean, as I said to the other committee that I was just staffing, is we will document all the discussion and perspectives that we hear at these meetings and share that with the Plan Commission for further guidance. So
Sure.
I don't have a strong opinion on this personally. I mean, a lot of this came from a template that we got from our consultant. Specifically, this language, I think, was part of that template. It's not something I added.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I.
I'm not wedded to, I don't have specific phrasing here that I would suggest instead.
And to be clear, I didn't mean to have you walk into the room and jump on you like this is an
No,
amazing
but Abby enjoyed
document.
the
Abby was
opportunity, so
Abby was talking about,
it comes natural for Abby. So if you guys only knew.
And I think the only differentiation on the next item, which is in family suite, that's just that it's within the principal structure, right? It's not detached.
When you say differentiation, what are you? Oh, yes.
Okay, so we kind of talked about that. We talked about how it would need to meet the setbacks for the principal building.
Right.
So now I'm gonna leave and let Mark chat with y'all about short-term residential rentals, and then I will come back when you're done. Take back over. Is that okay?
Yeah, I thought it was the end of the meeting.
No.
Okay. All right, now you can tell me what you really think about the ordinance. Except she took her pen. Oh, thank you. Are you on that topic now? The short-term rentals?
Yeah, I think yeah, I think that's where she means for us to be.
10. Oops, would help if I could. Think. There we go. So this language is, I believe, also largely from a template, although I think in this case we got language from Madison. I'm sorry, there's so many different parts of this code now, I can't recall where everything came from, but I know that this was something that our consultant, I think we went with some language that Madison had done because they had recently updated their standards. So happy to listen to any feedback you have.
I mean, I thought it looked pretty reasonable. I got a little bit tangled up in the, who has to live where and how many days you can rent for what your living situation is. Can you do like a 20-second on that?
Well, it is a little complicated. I would agree with you. Basically what it says is if you're there, from 1 to like less than a week. So if the short-term rental is for stays of less than a week, maybe that was up here. You just skip, oh, here it is. Let me skim this again. If it's less than a week, then the tourist rooming house shall be so then you have to be the occupant there. I mean, you have to be the owner. You have to live there. Sorry. You have to live there. If it's for more than a week, but less than 4 weeks, essentially, then you're limited to essentially half a year or well, it doesn't have to be consecutive year, but 100. So half of the days of the year can the place be rented. Actually, it does say consecutively, and renter must give the okay. if the operator, and then in D, if the operator who's operating the short-term rental, the Airbnb, let's just call it, occupies the residence at the time of the rental, then there's no limit to the number of days the short-term rental may operate. So basically, this is encouraging occupancy by the owners so that they can keep better tabs on the activities in the short-term rental. So it's not just a revolving door that is like a hotel. I think that's a fair summary behind the intent. We have had some complaints, a situation on Middleton Beach Road where there's been concerns about people coming and going, different people, every few days. So the intent, I think, is to make sure that the residents, that the occupancy on a short-term basis is not being overly disruptive to the neighborhood. That's generally the summary. This is sort of one of those things we'll probably put together a little fact sheet that simplifies this and has a diagram or whatever. Not that there are many of these in the city, but there are a few. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. Thank you. I read through it and I thought it looked really reasonable, like a good middle ground.
We did have a concern from our finance department about this short-term rental, residential rental license from a staffing standpoint. And our building inspector also raised the question about, maybe it wasn't our building inspector who said that. Well, anyway, so we did have the concern, a staffing concern about making sure that we're not duplicating what already is done by Madison, Public Health Madison, Dane County with the tourist rooming house license. So our building the building inspector has concerns that that the Madison Public Health would not address. So I think there's a reason why the building inspector remains involved, but I know the concern was that we don't want to burden our staff here at the city, which was small staff, by creating another layer of annual inspections without, by having it be a labor intensive process. So I will just share that that's been a general concern. We haven't made any changes to this, or we aren't proposing any changes at this point, but it's something that I wanted you to be aware of.
Mark, do you know what you're thinking of in terms of these licenses and different fees for somebody doing this?
Well, typically our licenses or fees would be linked to the level of effort expended. It doesn't mean it has to be that way, but we're not looking for profit, if that's what you're getting at. We're looking at, the purpose of our fees is to recoup costs. So
Sure.
To recoup our expenses. So I have no idea what we would require. I don't know what the fee is for
Okay.
Madison County.
Just for clarity, Mark, what's the expenses or fees that we're trying to recoup with this license?
Well, just there's a review. So for example, somebody has to fill out an application for a year. So that has to get reviewed. The general building inspection by the city. I assume that's not, well, it says an annual license required. So I guess the implication is that there's an annual building inspector visit. That would be how I read that. Making sure that, there's some of this is more clerical in nature, just to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, but there is this inspection by the city. So, I could see this being, I don't even know what time to, something like an hour. I have no idea what level of effort would be. It all depends on how thorough an application is, right? If somebody hasn't provided us with everything, then more follow-ups required. And so it's hard to say what the reasonable, I guess I'd want to look at what we charge for other fees for similar type of licenses,
Yeah.
Well,
Basically, you're covering staff time. Am I reading it wrong that there's a short-term residential license plus an administrative fee plus an annual city license fee?
No, I would say that there's only one fee. the license and the fee are tied together. What's the other one that you were talking about? What were-
Annual, there's the City of Middleton short-term rental, residential rental license at number H, or letter H, and up at number 2, annual city license.
Well, these are, subsections to 2. So there's an annual license required, and to get that license, you have to follow A through H.
I'm just
And
wondering if
that-
A through
then-
H are separate things. Separate
No, A-
fee.
No, A through A, the only fee that I see here is letter G. And that's, so annual city license required, so in order for that to be issued, all these steps, A through H have to be, or A through G have to be filed, and then H happens. So it's a sequence, well, it doesn't have to be a sequence, but these are all the check boxes that have to be, these are all the boxes that have to be checked in order to get the license issued, and in order to issue the license, there's an administrative fee.
Yeah, might I ask for simpletons like myself that you call it the same thing if you're meaning it the same thing?
Where is it not the same thing? I'm missing something.
Annual city license and City of Middleton short-term residential rental license.
So here I see, so this is just a title, annual city license required. So this is the name of the license. Here it's the same.
Okay, cool.
The same. Here. I think it's consistent.
Then you did it.
Is there a possibility to consider only doing the inspection maybe every 5 years, every 3 years, if there are no violations, just to ease up the burden on the staff? Just something to consider. You don't have to make a decision now about it.
As long as they're in good standing. As long as
Yeah,
our in good standing. Okay,
good standing and no violations.
well, I would, right.
Yeah.
See those as going hand in hand.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think you could have a violation or two, still be in good standing, but
Right.
I'm thinking if there are
Yeah.
violations, like if there's a reason to do the inspection, that's really what would be kind of more the spirit of it, just because, because I'm fine with the annual license, but then inspections should be done maybe a little less than annual.
Well, and for example, making sure there's smoke detectors and things like that. Carbon monoxide detectors are required, but from my understanding, Public Health Mass and Dane County also does inspections. And so again, we don't want to be afflictive, and I don't know what their process is, or process if you're Canadian. So
Okay.
I'll find out what the, we want to avoid duplication of effort. This is what I'm hearing you say, so.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
I just want to say thank you, Mark. I know you've really taken the lead on this, and it's a huge and super comprehensive job.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for your feedback. The Penn Transit Committee just met as well, and they had some pretty progressive thoughts on, for example, eliminating parking minimums as it relates to housing affordability. And in Minneapolis, there's, I guess there's been some experience by getting rid of parking minimums that allows smaller lots to become affordable fourplexes, for example, for affordable housing, especially if they're on transit corridors. So we had a good, robust discussion at Penn Bike Transit this evening with some ideas along those lines, which had mixed reaction from a couple members, but there were several people interested in that. So it's been this is a very good process, a good exercise for the city to go through and discuss how we want our community to evolve in the foreseeable future. I can get Abby again, or unless there's other things you had for me specifically.
Mark. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought.
Just kidding. All right. So, the next item is around bicycle and pedestrian access standards.
I thought you were done with the zoning ordinance. Okay.
So this talks about requirements for bike parking, which we don't have embedded into our ordinance currently, but it is something that we're recommending through the design review process. Also talks about the needs to have on-site connections, walkways for pedestrians, design requirements for pedestrian access, ADA. And I think that's about it.
And then there's certain number of a minimum number of spaces in the table, in the parking table. Which is, I think, down a couple pages down, I think, if you just scroll, you'll get to it. Oops. Maybe it was above. I can't remember, sorry. Oh, there we go.
There we go. No, wait.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mark, how do you define parking space for a bike?
It's defined in the standards
Okay, I
above.
missed it. Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. We had that discussion just now at Ped Bike Transit too. So, you know, I like to use the example of it's above that actually. So, you know, there's certain types of bicycle parking devices that are much friendlier for bicycles and much better for bicycles than others. Like, for instance, the old school bender, the wheel bender racks, the school that you used to see in elementary schools. You know, those are generally terrible because they don't support the bike properly and bikes fall over. So we have standards in here where we're encouraging a U-lock system or, you know, we aren't telling people exactly what to get, but we're saying what kind of standards you need to follow for preferred bicycle parking. We also have, you know, the number of spaces and how to provide parking within a multifamily building. What are considered accessible spaces for clearance and minimizing dust and things like that. So that's the definition of a space. One of the discussions that Public Works came up at Public Works Committee, as well as tonight at Ped Bike Transit, is why don't we have a requirement for single family versus we do required for an ADU. And I think the best answer I can give is that we have a requirement wherever somebody may not have one provided. So I didn't say that very well. So wherever there's like a rental situation or you're going to work and the owner of that property may not have provided it, but you have a bicycle and you expect to be able to park your bike, that's when we're required. Whereas if a single family residence, you know, the person owns their own property, you know, they have room to put parking on there if they want it. It's not something we need to require there, if that makes sense. So generally we had good, I didn't have any comments on this from Ped Bike Transit Committee members other than for a campground, which came up from Lisa Hanaira brought it up. And she's right. I mean, we didn't have there it is. It says there's no parking minimum required. So they came up with a standard today that they're suggesting of 5 spaces for every 20 campsites, which is perfectly reasonable to me. So I don't know why that was none. It probably just, I don't remember why. I think I got this from, there were a couple different sources. I created this table actually. And there were a couple different sources I consulted. So if I only have that is the only change, I'm happy with that. I will say though, there was a big discussion at Ped Bike Transit about getting rid of parking minimums, which before Abby came back in, I was starting to talk about. So not having parking minimums and letting the market just decide when parking is necessary, recognizing that most developers will want to provide off-street parking, but providing opportunities, the flexibility for people like in the downtown area to have infill sites where they don't need to provide parking. One of our ped bike members pointed out that requiring off-street parking is essentially a subsidy for people who don't, it's paid for by people who don't have a car. So we have a member who doesn't have a vehicle, but built into his rent is the cost to provide off-street parking and 1.5 parking spaces. And he says, why should he have to pay for that when it's when he doesn't have a vehicle? So it's an equity issue. That was the argument, as well as consumption of land issue.
I guess to that point, how has it been working out downtown? I know there was a lot of discussion about parking allocation for all of the apartments and businesses down there, and I'm wondering how that's worked out.
I'll defer to Abby on that.
Yeah, it's a sticky question because it depends who you talk to. There is definitely a perception among many residents, if not, I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if it were most residents, that there's a lack of parking in the downtown. And I know I hear this from our business owners a lot too, because they hear it from their customers. I think that, to me, it's kind of a matter of what is a reasonable expectation for a distance to walk. Because when you go to Costco, you probably walk a further distance than you have to walk when you're parking in downtown Middleton. But you can see the door, and so it's a little bit easier for people to like stomach that distance than it is when you're having to walk past 10 businesses to get to where you want to go. One area where I think that there are really legitimate concerns is the lack of accessible parking stalls in the downtown, particularly because we do have our senior center down here. And I've often advocated for marking more stalls as accessible, just to make sure that people who really cannot get around easily have the option, and then make the able-bodied people walk a little further.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, with T-Wall's property, there was a lot of back and forth. There were parking studies. It was really controversial at the time. They have not been very good about making those available to the public. They are really only for people who are visiting one of the businesses. But I think that there's also a perception that they're not, even if you're going to eat at Long Table, most people who are doing that probably are not parking inside of Middleton Center because they don't feel comfortable. It's probably more people who work in the building that are parking there, or people who live in the building. They did have those lift stalls for a while, and many of those were taken out because they weren't working properly.
They're never in. There's nothing in the lift that
they're just empty on the top.
Yep.
But you can still park underneath.
You can
right?
park underneath, but yeah, the garage is hard to navigate. It is hard to find. I have a pass for the garage, and there's not much for public parking.
Right. Is it full most days?
Most days, it's pretty full, especially for a large vehicle. There's tight spots. There's that little parking when you enter in Middleton Center, there's off to the side, not underground, but that's really hard to navigate too. So
yeah,
I mean, I can see where people might not even know where they can't park in the area. So.
Right.
I would love to just put a voice out there that says that I am 100% behind extending the walk a little bit. And in fact, if it were up to me, we'd shut down Hubbard all the way, from Village Green all the way to Long Table, and it would be permanently gone. I really don't like the fact that there's so much traffic going through there when there's all this pedestrian traffic that should be walking around there. People should have an opportunity to park somewhere 2-3 blocks away, and then once they're there, you're walking. And I think that's something that I think Wisconsinites and in this particular area, I think we've gotten kind of used to, but if you go outside and other cities, you'll see that it's more appropriate. The design is you park and then you walk to an area that has a lot of walkable, accessible areas, or you park your bike real close to where you're going to go into the commercial area. So just wanted to throw that out there.
You know, my daughter sent me a picture of, she lives in Minneapolis, of a Woonerf there. And I know we talked about that with the planning. And if we were ever going to, it's a little bit off topic, and I don't know whether you accommodated any of that kind of use, Mark, but if we were ever going to trial a Woonerf, that would be perhaps a good place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think Abby needs to put that word in her minutes.
Oh, I will.
I just used it like 6 times because I'm so proud that I know what it means. And 2 years ago, I didn't know what it meant.
I just sent off, actually, this probably went to more people than I intended it to, but I replied on your email, Abby. When I was in Amsterdam about 6 weeks ago, I saw this underground bicycle parking garage that I had a little 20-second snippet of video. Enjoy. That's what the rest of the world is doing. And it's pretty fascinating.
Thank you for sending it.
Yeah, I want to see it too then. It sounds like there isn't any specific, how do you feel about the minimum parking? The automobile minimum parking requirement then in general? I mean, should we still have minimums or not? Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Well, for commercial purposes, I would lower it greatly. But and again, I'm not following the chart that you have up to know exactly what those numbers are. Is it offices, restaurant? There we go. Okay, that's, yeah.
So our current standard for a restaurant, for example, is boy, now I get all these numbers in my head. I think it's one space for every 3 seats, if I remember right. And this is saying 20% of maximum capacity of persons. So I guess that would be 1 for every 5, essentially, assuming everyone's sitting, I mean. So that means it's a decrease of what it's been. The template that
I'm not sure if that would be a decrease though, would it?
well, if we do 1 for every 3 seats, and now 20% of maximum capacity.
Okay,
Well,
so capacity is by the number of seats, not by the.
well, if I just use that, I had that as a caveat, if that was based on number of seats. But the 125% that you see, actually the table where I borrowed this from actually had maximums that were 150%, so I decreased it. It was either Madison or it was another city in southeast Wisconsin. I'd have to check my notes. I did this last winter when I was in Colorado. I was doing some work. So I don't remember it all. The source.
I mean, thinking again about workforce housing and what the CDA is supposed to be thinking about, I think that the trimming down parking for employees or where people live, if they're living in workforce housing, should be accompanied by a more robust public transit system than I think the redo of the Madison Metro routes and the discontinuation of any semblance of a Middleton circulator with trolley going away leaves us with. So I don't know how, from a policy perspective, without finding other ways for people to get around when walking isn't practical and biking is hard in the winter, I don't know how much of that we want to do, just thinking about it from perspective of a working mom with 2 or 3 kids or whatever.
Completely agree with that as well. The public transportation folks need to also kind of weigh in that they're aware of the need for that public transportation to move people efficiently and extensively, you know, putting bus routes where people want to go and where they will need to go, either for work or play.
Yeah, I would echo Chris and Kari. I've a long time wanted us to own some of those trolleys. Even if it just connects you to the bus routes that take you into Madison or wherever, but yeah, has to go hand in hand before we erase all of the areas for parking.
Well, and also this may be the one, if we don't, if this zoning revision stands for another 40 years, this could be our one shot to really think about some zoning ordinances that will nudge people to more public transportation options and bicycle options that I think are just much more community oriented and friendly, rather than everybody having their own car, their own parking spot, and driving back and forth. And there's a lot of parking. We could cut down on a lot of parking lot surface area.
Sure.
Great. Let's go on to the exterior building design standards. Okay, so these. Actually, I don't think I'm right.
I'm not sure you are either. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
10.0701.
I think I just put this in here because it has to do with affordability and we did have, as she's looking here, I will say that the work group, the informal work group that was advising the drafting of the ordinance recommended doing away with standards, many of the standards that we had in there for single family residences and duplexes. So this is actually a more abbreviated section of the code than what the template from our consultant originally called for. I didn't have anything specific here in mind, other than I just thought it was a topic that you might have an interest in.
So these standards would apply to new construction, additions, alterations. And then up above it says, see a different section for the applicability for design standards to single and two family.
Yeah, and those are basically wiped out. So
Katie, you raised your hand?
I did. When I was on a rowing team, we were in a historic boathouse, and they added on to the boathouse, and the Historical Society in Madison would not allow them to use the same materials because it was partly to show the historic part and keep it visually different. And I'm just wondering if that has to be considered anywhere in here with additions.
That's a good point. All additions shall match or be substantially similar to the design and materials of the existing building.
Right. So the house that I am in right now, I built my Pilates studio onto it, and my home is cedar shake, and I used different color and board and batten for the addition so that I could still show my 100-year-old house.
Yep. We ran into that with the design, the historic Pheasant Branch design guidelines, where the initial proposal was to match. And we had a lot of concerns from some of the historic building owners, like the Stam House, that if you were to match with new stone, it would actually make the older buildings appear shabby by comparison. So that's also maybe a concern. I don't know. It sounds like maybe this section should be taken out.
Yeah, that would be my vote, but
this is for commercial, yeah.
even considering that that little, the first blacksmith shop, like on Branch Street, if they ever wanted to add on to that, you wouldn't want them to use that same material, right?
Right,
And that's considered commercial.
yep. Yeah, I think we would want them to differentiate it.
Yeah.
So we'll add
So
that.
strike that. That's what
Yep.
you're saying.
Strike that. And then further down, there are some building classes, material types. And then there's a chart showing the different types of construction and what class of material would be required.
I think there might be a typo in the third row down, new construction of any kind. Oh, no, so it's predominantly class 1 with class 2 and 3, is that supposed to be?
Yeah, I would say that should be a 3.
I was wondering, okay.
You know, every committee is tasked with finding at least one typo, so
All right, bye, guys.
Kari, yeah, the winner.
I love
there will be a
proofreading,
prize.
so.
Oh.
I love proofreadings.
What I'm hearing is Carrie is offering to proofread the whole ordinance in the next week.
Find time, yeah.
So any comments on that section? So that was to the end of the list that was in your memo. Did any overachievers read the rest of the document that would like to comment on any other sections?
And you want to admit it is the point here, in your insomnia.
Well, we have your comments down and we will format them into a document that we can easily hand off to the Plan Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
This is-
Thanks for
Thank you.
letting us weigh in.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you.
This is Emily. I just want to say thank you to everyone. I was staying quiet, not only because I thought this was a 7 o'clock meeting and it was 5:30 and I was off at math class with the kids, but also because I listened in as the Plan Commission. We helped kind of nurture that development along with Mark and Abby. And so I wanted to hear what you guys were thinking, that raw, reaction, rather than putting in what I had already seen and had time to think about. So I do appreciate the insights. I was listening. I know Abby and Mark were also listening. And Katie, thank you for taking the lead since I was in transit. And yes, math was done. So everyone, thank you so much. And the meeting is adjourned. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.